those of you who don't know, this is Mapuana and I'm Alexis. We're senior OTA students here at Huntington. We have a big baccalaureate project in our major, and we decided to research sensory and emotional regulation and its effects on students in the classroom and come up with some beneficial tips and tricks that will help future teachers or current teachers. So, thank you for coming.
Why feeling and feelings? So sensory regulation is all about regulating what one is feeling based on the 8 ways one receives sensory input. And emotional regulation is about regulating one's feelings and how emotions are affected by that. So feeling and feelings connects both sensory and emotional regulation and how to improve the overall self-regulation for students.
So to start us off, we wanted to come up with some learning objectives so you know kind of what to listen for throughout the presentation. So by the end of this, we want you guys to be able to understand emotional regulation and sensory processing, to be able to identify possible techniques to aid a child in regulating themselves, and to be able to implement classroom adaptations.
We have created an informational video to start us off with the help of some students on campus, JC Walden and Matthew Roman. So we are going to watch this video to start us off.
What is emotional and sensory regulation? Hi, I'm Mapuana. And I'm Alexis. And we are about to tell you. Emotional regulation is the ability to maintain control over one's emotional state. When someone experiences emotional dysregulation, they are not able to adequately feel or control their emotions. Emotional dysregulation has been proven to disrupt productivity and accuracy for students in the classroom. According to the American Journal of Occupational Therapy, emotional dysregulation also has a direct effect on occupational performance and could lead to occupational dysfunction. A school-aged child's occupation is being a student, and we would like to provide resources for educators to help their students learn most effectively to succeed in the classroom. Emotional dysregulation can present differently with each student. They may struggle with the congruency of their emotions. How they feel internally may present differently externally. For example, students may appear as aggressive, antisocial, hyperactive, or non-compliant when they are not able to regulate their emotions. Students labeled as those terms may rather be overwhelmed and anxious from new content in class, frustrated while attempting assignments, or have trouble learning due to other factors affecting their emotions, such as social or family struggles.
Struggles with sensory input stem from 2 main issues: overstimulation and understimulation. Sensory dysregulation is a difficulty in interpreting the sensory input in the world around you. Some may experience sensory seeking or sensory avoidance, or experience both and jump around on the spectrum. Let's start with what the senses are. There are 8 sensory systems: visual, anything that you see or utilize your eyes for; auditory, hearing different sounds such as talking or hearing a fan in the room; tactile, the sense of touch, feeling the clothes on your skin; olfactory, the sense of smell, whether that be the smell of warm cookies or an overwhelming odor; gustatory, the sense of taste; vestibular, the sense of balance; proprioception, awareness of your body in space. If you close your eyes, can you still bring your pointer finger to your nose? Interoception, awareness of what you are feeling on the inside. How fast is your heart beating? Are you feeling hungry? How do these sensory systems play into sensory processing? When a child is overstimulated, they may have hypersensitivity to the world around them and be sensory avoiding. This can look different in every child, but some common symptoms may include not liking to be touched by others, being sensitive to and hearing background noises that others cannot hear, refusing to wear certain clothes, such as a scratchy sweater or socks with a seam that bothers them, or they may avoid swings or other equipment that provides proprioceptive or vestibular input. On the other end of the spectrum, when a child is understimulated, they may be sensory seeking. This can also look different in every child, but has common symptoms such as jumping, skipping, hopping, crashing into objects, touching others in objects often, seeking or making loud noises, and preferring rough play. These children will often seem rambunctious and prefer playground equipment, like swings and merry-go-rounds. Children may fall somewhere between and go back and forth on the spectrum of over and understimulation.
How do these tie together? Emotional distress can also stem from sensory processing difficulties.
Imagine this. You are wearing a t-shirt with a tag that is scratching you to the point where it is unbearable. and there's a humming that no one else seems to hear, but it is driving you crazy. How would you feel?
Overwhelmed, angry, annoyed? How can you regulate these emotions? How can you stop yourself from hearing and feeling these things at such an intense level? How do you react to this?
You blow up.
For further information on how to feel your feelings, visit the Feeling and Feeling site.
So after listening to that video, we wanted to give you a little bit of a case study so that we can refer back to for later on in the presentation. So Lucy is a 9-year-old who absolutely loves to jump around and play on playground equipment. She frequently plays rough with other kids and doesn't understand when she's being too rough. When in the classroom, Lucy can't seem to sit still. She often gets restless and gets very upset and throws tantrums when she is made to sit still. How can we help Lucy in the classroom? What might Lucy be struggling with? We'll answer these questions in the following slides. So let's deepen our understanding a little bit on what emotional and sensory regulation are.
Emotional regulation is the management of one's emotions despite any internal or external factors that may cause an interruption of the norm. So this includes recognizing one's emotions and learning how to process and express them in a healthy way.
Whereas sensory processing is the ability to process and interpret the world around you through your 8 senses, which are, like from the video, visual, your sight, auditory, being able to hear, tactile, your touch, olfactory, which is the sense of smell, gustatory, which is taste, vestibular, which is your sense of balance, proprioception, which is awareness of your body in space, and interoception, which is awareness of what's going on inside your body. Overstimulation generally means a child is hypersensitive to the world around them, and it can be difficult for them when there's too much going on. Whereas understimulation is the opposite. These kids will seek out and further input. This isn't something that's set in stone for a kid and they can go from one end of the spectrum to the other and swing back and forth from time to time and day to day. So how do sensory and emotional regulation correspond? Difficulties in sensory recognition can lead to emotional outbursts. These can include anger with throwing tantrums or crying or the need to isolate themselves. So referring to Lucy, she throws tantrums when she's made to sit still. This might indicate that she's having difficulties with getting enough sensory input. Regulating both your sensory stimuli and your emotion creates a more beneficial mindset for learning and allows for the mind to be more open to accepting new information.
When a student is unable to regulate their emotions or senses, it can often be displayed through behaviors in the classroom, such as sad, angry, or energetic outbursts that may disrupt the student's learning and their peers' learning. So it may look like a student's leg constantly bouncing, frequent conversation at inappropriate times, poor posture and exhaustion, and the inability to focus. When a student learns how to self-regulate themselves or take control of their academic success by managing their efforts and resources, they will be able to find control and balance their emotions in the classroom. So how can a student do this? They can plan, monitor, and reflect. A student can plan and create goals with a personalized schedule that meets their needs. They can monitor their performance and progress in accomplishing those goals, and then they can reflect on areas of success and areas of improvements based on those performance and progress. The Zones of Regulation is a wonderful resource to use with students to learn how to recognize the emotions that they're feeling. So it categorizes emotions into 4 different categories. So the blue zone has emotions such as sad, tired, bored. The green zone is the zone that you want students to be in because that's when they're focused and ready to learn. The yellow zone is on the line of losing control. They may be frustrated, worried, silly, and then the red zone is when the student is out of control, so they're angry, terrified, and having outbursts. This chart here displays different tactics for students to use based on what zone they're in. So if a student is in the blue zone and they're feeling sad or tired, taking a brain break or taking a walk in the hallway may help them re-energize themselves to be ready to learn and get back in the green zone. If a student is in the green zone, that's the zone that they want to stay in. So whatever they're doing to remain focused is what they should keep doing to stay in the green zone. A student in the yellow zone who may be feeling silly may need to get some of their wiggles out, so maybe doing a sensory exercise or squeezing something could help them regulate back to the green zone. And then a student in the red zone who may be feeling angry may need to find a spot in the classroom to regulate themselves by themselves, so they're not at danger for themselves or their classmates. So the key is for each student to find what works best for them in whatever zone they're in, so then if they're one day in the yellow zone, they'll remember, that worked for me, now I can get back to the green zone. So it's kind of something that once they figure out what works for them, they can do that all the time. Okay, now let's take a deeper look at deep breathing. So deep breathing allows the brain to connect to the area of the brain that regulates emotion, and this allows emotional regulation to take action throughout the body. So 4x4 breathing is a technique where you breathe in for a count of 4 and breathe out for a count of 4. So I'm gonna have all of us do that right now just to practice it, so then you can teach someone else, and maybe after you'll feel energized and more focused on what we're talking about today. So I'm gonna count to 4, and then I'll have us all breathe in, and then I'm gonna count to 4 again, and then breathe out during that. Okay, I'm gonna count now. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. Okay, so this is great because students can do this while they're seated at their desk, so they don't really have to get up to do anything. It's something that they can do on their own to regulate themselves if they're in any different zone.
So understimulation and overstimulation in the classroom are very important to recognize. In a learning environment, it's imperative to facilitate a space where a child can succeed. A huge component in this is the stimulus around the classroom. Having an excess amount of colors and lights and posters can be overstimulating, but not having a space for a child to stimulate themselves can prove to be understimulating, in turn causing difficulties with focusing or emotional dysregulation. So what are some tips that we can use to aid in sensory processing? Understimulation, as we know, is a lack of sensory input. In turn, overstimulation is having too much sensory input. So how do we adapt this? For understimulation, having intermittent flexible seating, fidget toys, stretching time, and sensory activities is a great start. And for overstimulation, having a quiet area, noise-canceling headphones, dim lights, and reduced visual stimulus are some ways we can adapt the classroom. The biggest and easiest implementation is heavy work. It can be difficult to distinguish between under and overstimulation, and heavy work is beneficial because it helps on both sides of the spectrum. So your go-to definitely should be heavy work. In situations where children are struggling with sensory processing, this is some sort of activity that pushes or pulls on the body, and it serves to center them by providing the proprioception that they're needing. So examples of heavy work in the classroom can include squishing Play-Doh, playing Twister, stretching, marching, running in place, push-ups. These are all grounding activities, and anything that can be rhythmic movement, not erratic movement, can lead to a calmer and more regulated demeanor. It works through bringing them back to their midline, because many people get just enough sensory input throughout the day, but these children might not. These activities can serve to wake up the sensory system or calm everything down and bring them back to midline in order to facilitate the best mindset and physical being for learning and function. While flexible seating does seem like a fix-all, and I know it's something that's a very hot topic, it should be used with caution. Flexible seating, someone may think that when a child is understimulating, letting them bounce on a ball will let them get out all those jitters. But if the movement is erratic and not a rhythmic bouncing, it can serve to further hype them up rather than calm them down, which is what you're trying to do.
The ideal classroom would have all of these resources in it for students to have access to. So first, an emotional planner is writing down the activity that evokes a certain emotion, the emotional response to that activity, and the response strategy to regulate that emotion. So for example, the activity may be a spelling test, and that spelling test causes the student to feel anxious, and then the strategy to regulate that emotion is the 4x4 breathing exercise. So this planner can help students find common activities that evoke certain emotions and determine which strategies work best to self-regulate. A feelings word wall is a wall with more descriptive words than happy, sad, or angry. So it'll have words such as joyful, eager, hopeful, jealous, guilty, more descriptive words so students can best identify what they're feeling and not just label every negative emotion as sad or angry, or every happy emotion, or every positive emotion as happy. So they'll be able to understand that there are different emotions that exist, and it's okay to feel different emotions, and they'll understand what they're actually feeling themselves. A designated rehabilitation area, or a calm down corner, is an area in the classroom where students can go if they need a break to reassess and regulate their senses and emotions. So this can look like bean bags with weighted blankets, fidget toys, books, soft music, coloring books, water, sand, timers, and more. And this area should be monitored and only used for emotional and sensory regulation, so it shouldn't just be like a come and go space. It should be like, I'm going to this area because I need to regulate what I'm feeling, and then they can rejoin the class. So this provides a healthy way to teach students that it's okay to find their own space and time to regulate what they're feeling, and they will be able to learn that closing themselves off or having an emotional outburst in front of everyone is not the only way to calm themselves down. A sensory board or sensory corner contains objects or activities that provide the sensory input that they're desiring. So this can look like different textures or sounds or colors, yoga balls, weighted blankets, and more. So students with sensory seeking or avoiding tendencies can use these to regulate their senses. Students spend on average 6 to 7 hours in school each day. And for children, that is a very long time to be sitting still, having a calm body, and maintaining an active mind. So a simple way to keep students engaged in the classroom is, while being able to release energy, is investing in wobble cushions. So they're like those round cushions that you may see kids sitting on sometimes. So that's just a simple way for students to like get a little bit of wiggles out while they're sitting down and still working on schoolwork. Fidgets are a great way for students who require constant sensory input to remain focused while they're doing their schoolwork. So having available fidgets for students to use, such as spinners, stress balls, the bands that sit between the legs of the chair, stress balls, the mesh marble holders, and Theraputty are great ways for students to remain focused while still having some type of sensory input that's not distracting to their classmates. And lastly, the signs and posters, such as the zones of regulation posters, the feelings word wall, different yoga relaxation posters, or different yoga relaxation poses, and different facial expressions with people or emojis are great ways for students to reference things in the classroom while they're seated at their desk. So if they're just seated at their desk and they glance at the feelings word wall, they may think like, oh, I'm so bored. Oh no, I'm not bored. I'm actually like very exhausted because of ABC that's going on in their life. So they'll just be able to reference things without getting up from their desk, which is good too if getting up is not an option. So while making all those renovations to a classroom may not be an option for everyone, just having a simple calm down corner in a classroom, just a small area, is a small addition that may make a huge impact on your students. So just having a few of the resources listed on the previous slide may allow students to have this space that they can go to decompress and then rejoin the classroom so their learning is not too inhibited by what they're feeling. Now that we have heard about the adaptations in the classroom and strategies to support sensory and emotional needs for students, let's refer back to Lucy.
So we know that Lucy loves to jump, she loves to play rough, and she can't seem to sit still. She often has emotional outbursts when she is made to sit still. From this, we can see Lucy might be struggling with understimulation, and implementing heavy work in a sensory board or fidget is a great start. So, for example, given that Lucy struggles to sit still, and we know that heavy work is a great go-to, her teacher decided to give her a heavy quantum job every morning when she arrives to get her ready for the day. Her classroom job is to get down all the chairs from on top of the desks and put them in place. Additionally, during instruction time, she is permitted to check out a classroom fidget to use at her desk so she can keep her hands busy while also listening to the instructions. Lucy's teacher also allows her to lay on her stomach during her reading time while reading books. This gives her whole body contact with the floor and in turn gives her more sensory input. On days where she's really wiggly, her teacher lays a weighted lap pad across her back. during this time. Adding in these strategies has helped Lucy to be able to focus and participate throughout her school day and not be distracted by her need to wiggle, fidget, and move. This has also helped her not be disruptive or distracting to her classmates. So think of a student in your classroom or future classroom that might struggle similarly to Lucy, and other ways of how some of these strategies can support that student.
If you would like more information on what we just talked about, we have a website and it's also listed here, so feel free to check it out now or whenever you want, or just type it in so then you can check it out later. But we would love for you to check that out, and thank you so much for coming. And does anybody have any questions?
What are some things you would recommend to do in secondary classrooms?
In secondary classrooms?
Yeah, like high school, middle school.
Go for it.
I'm currently doing my level 2 field work for occupational therapy in the schools, and I was at the middle school today, and they have a sensory room, and a student actually came in and used it. So I think these are all still applicable to secondary students. Just the approach might not be as like how you would approach like a preschooler about it, just like kind of knowing the age that you're approaching, but still using these tactics because they all work.
So implementing deep breathing is something that can work from a itty bitty child all the way up to somebody in their 70s. It's something that can calm you down if you're anxious, if you're worried, anything like that. And fidgets are something that anybody can use if they're needing that input. So it really is just modifying your attempt for your approach, not your attempt. Your approach for what that kid might need.
Okay, I have a question. You said something about like buzzing lights and stuff. What do the fidgets make noise and that like distracts other students? Does it help that one student more, or does it like distract more students? Or how do you go about that if they're using the fidget like in the wrong way?
Yeah. So that's gonna have to be just instruction. If you have another child who's complaining about that, you might need to find another strategy to implement with your child who's understimulated. The buzzing lights and that kind of stuff, it's something we don't notice because it's just background noise for us, and our brain just filters it out. But for students who are having difficulties with sensory processing, hearing a fan in the background can just become overwhelming, and that's all they can think about, and they might not be able to focus. So yeah, just changing up, okay, so this is like Timmy's using this fidget, but Johnny's bothered by it. So maybe we need to change what Timmy's doing so Johnny's not bothered by it, something that makes less noise.
Any other questions? Thank you all for, oh, sorry.
What do you do if a student is distracted by the fidgets or the wiggle cushions or the tools that you, or strategies you're trying to use? Instead of it helping them, it's distracting them and they make it a tool.
I would recommend only using that in a time, like in smaller instances, and trying to find something that's not as distracting, so they still have something that they can use in their hands, but it might not be the object that's distracting them, and figuring out what it is that can't be distracting them. Like Mapuana talked about the band around the bottom of your chair that you can use to kind of just kick your feet against, so it's not something that's in your hands that you can play with and you're just kind of kicking your feet. Might be something that would be beneficial, but it would change from kid to kid.
I've also found that, because there are a few students right now in my fieldwork where I've noticed like they don't get to have access to sensory things while they're in the classroom all the time, but they get sensory breaks to leave the classroom and go jump on the trampoline for 10 minutes or go play with water beads for 10 minutes. So I think even just allowing them to have like a break from class to go get that sensory input and then come back, and then that usually, for at least the students I've seen, it leaves them regulated for a few hours, and then they're able to focus and succeed in the classroom. And then they go back and get that sensory input, and then, so it's kind of just a cycle of like getting it when they need it. Well, thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it.